Hello there, welcome back to the Closet Historian. Today, again, we're going to be doing something a little bit different than usual here on the channel. I wanted to do a pattern drafting tutorial for you guys. However, this will be a very simple pattern modification rather than a full drafting tutorial or anything like that. So if you are not a seamstress or interested in pattern drafting, I won't be offended if you skip this video, but it will also not be going into too much depth. It's a pretty easy modification. Today, I wanted to show you guys how I modify the necklines of my bodice dress shirt patterns, how you modify necklines in general. It's a pretty simple thing. I just wanted to go through it for all of you who might be intimidated by the idea of altering their patterns in any way. This is a very easy first dipping your toe into pattern drafting, and for me, hopefully a very easy way to learn how to do like pattern drafting videos and kind of get this set up for maybe doing more like things like this in the future. So we'll see how it goes, but here we are. Let's just jump right in before I ramble any longer. How to change the neckline on a pattern. Okay, so here are some of the supplies you will need here. You're going to need a ruler, some paper scissors, pens and pencils, an eraser, tape, and large paper. You can use tissue paper. I have alphanumeric paper here. You can use butcher paper. You can use wrapping paper, whatever you've got on hand. Also, you'll need a pattern, of course, the pattern you would like to change the neckline of. Here is one I prepared earlier. I'm just going to start by squaring off a line here on our piece of paper. I'm going to use a pencil like I would, but then I'll go over it with a marker because I just want this to show up for you guys. Of course, you don't need to use pen or marker yourself because you might want to make changes or erase things, but I just wanted to use marker so it'll show up on camera for you guys here. So I have a nice squared off line to start with, and I will line up the center front of my front pattern piece on that. And then I'm going to go ahead and just trace this pattern piece to make a copy of it because we don't want to modify our original pattern in case something goes wrong. We want a copy of our original pattern still. So we're just going to keep that original and make a new copy to mess with. So I'm just going to go ahead and trace this pattern piece, marking the darts as well so I can draw those onto the new pattern. Then of course just copy over any pertinent information you may need or any cutting instructions. So now we have a copy. I'm going to take this other marker here and just draw in our darts so that you can see where they end here and we can find the apex that way. So I'm just going to draw in those dart legs here, and then you can square up those dart legs, and where they intersect, that is the apex. This is the center of the bust, really sort of like the nipple point. Don't tell Tumblr. But you can kind of decide how high or low you want your neckline, knowing that that is the center of the bust. So you don't want to make your necklines too low, of course, unless it's the look you're going for. I'm just going to square off a nice V-neck neckline here, not too low, not too scandalous. You can also do a little squared off neckline here. It's sort of a squared off boat neck. I'm sure that has a particular name that I don't know. You can really just draw on whatever shape of neckline you want if you're just keeping it simple and finishing it with a facing like I'm showing you here. As long as you're keeping this shoulder point the same on the back, you can, of course, change both as well. This is a really shallow V-neck here, really high, shallow V. I'll put up a picture of a dress where I use this neckline on it. Then this is the neckline that I get asked about all the time, and it's just a little simple S-curve that I draw onto the pattern. I don't know if this neckline has a name. It's sort of a cross between a sweetheart neckline and a boat neck. You can of course draw it lower as well, almost like a V-neck with a curve, but it's just something I just drew on here, really. One day I just, went for it. You can really just draw whatever shape you want as long as you're willing to fuss with it. So I'm just going to use this top one because this is the neckline I get asked about all the time. So I'm just tracing that over it with a darker marker as well. And then we will make a facing just kind of like this. We'll trace one out. So let me grab another sheet of paper here from the side. So to finish this neckline, I'm going to use a facing, which is what I normally finish my necklines with because I don't want to mess with linings most of the time. So I'm just going to square off that center front, tracing through here, and then mark that as the center front, of course. And then you're just going to go ahead and trace that neckline you drew on the bodice pattern through onto this facing pattern. So go ahead and just trace that through the paper. If you're using a non-transparent paper, then this is going to be harder, I will grant you. But you can, of course, just cut out the front pattern and then lay it on top of paper and trace it that way. Just square off the shoulder up here as well. And then I'm just going to make this facing 2.5 inches wide. I do make it right or 90-degree angles at the center front and the shoulder, and then just draw a sort of curve in between to link those areas, keeping it about 2.5 inches wide the whole way. So I'm just going to sketch in the other line of that facing here. I like finishing my dresses and tops, whatever, with facings unless I'm lining them. I usually don't line a lot of my projects, really. I'd rather use a facing than a lining just because lining I feel like is more work and I am lazy. I'm just going to mark this as the front facing. You can also like number these so that you know which facing matches which bodice pattern. I have a lot of very homeless facing patterns laying around my sewing room because I don't always label them properly and keep them all together nice and neat because I'm faux organized. I'm not really always super organized, sadly. So you can go ahead and cut out these pattern pieces now. Now remember that neckline we drew, unless you add a 1/2 inch onto these two pattern pieces, that is going to be a 1/2 inch lower than you drew it. I just keep that in mind when drawing things. Basically, anywhere you cut on a pattern piece, it's going to have the seam allowance subtracted from it. So here I was going to sketch on what I mean. So your sewing line is going to be a 1/2 inch in from this neckline that you drew, unless you add on additional paper for a seam allowance. So it's going to come in a 1/2 inch here. That's where your stitching line will be, and so it's going to be finished about a 1/2 inch in lower, which I just keep in mind when I draw my necklines. So you can either just keep it in mind like I did, or you can just add on a 1/2 inch of paper to your finished pattern pieces that we just made here. So just remember that 1/2 inch is going to be taken away. Here I have the front and back pattern pieces, and I'm just lining those up to make sure they still will work together. You can leave this back piece just as it is if you don't really care about what the back neckline is, or you can of course make it lower, make it a V, do whatever you want to the back as well. As long as the shoulder seam still matches up, then you're good to go. If you do change the shoulder line on the front, just make sure you change it on the back as well. You're just going to do another facing on the back. Here I'm just kind of showing you what the facing will look like finished. So you just grab another piece of paper and make a facing for the back the same way we did for the front, basically. I just drew this little bodice pattern so I could draw a couple more necklines for you. You can, of course, make the neckline higher and tighter here. You might want to do a mock-up for this one, though, just because you don't want it to end up choking yourself. If you have a sloper pattern, then this is the neckline that will be on your sloper that you are modifying anytime anyway, so that's just kind of the highest of necklines. But you can also, again, I'm just going to mark the apex on this little guy here. You can also draw in a sweetheart neckline. So this I'm just drawing in like a V here and then connecting it up to the shoulder point. And that is just like a very basic, I guess, angled sweetheart neckline. I will show a picture of a dress that I use this neckline on here. And then I will actually link also to the blog post where I go into detail about how I drafted this particular bodice pattern for this dress over on my blog. You can also do a curved, more traditional sweetheart as well. Just make sure you curve that little line down there. You can do like a scalloped neckline too. You just have to be willing to fuss with the facing because it'll be a little bit more annoying. And again, your facing is just going to be drawn about 2.5 inches, traced just like we did with the more simple necklines, but you can also do a facing with the sweetheart, no problem. Here is a 1950s dress from my collection that I bought on Etsy last year. This one I think might be a home sewn dress because it's not the best sewing actually, but inside you can see it is also finished with a facing. It does have edge stitching along the facing here, and then the curves are clipped inside so that will lay nicely. The back, as you can see, is a little bit messy sewing here, but this is just an example of a vintage dress that has a facing finished. This is a dress that I made myself with a sweetheart neckline here. This is very similar to the pattern modification that, again, I will have linked in the blog post below. This one from the inside just has a sweetheart-shaped facing, and then the facing is tacked down in the center front at the shoulder seams and at that little detail along the side, just so it lays nicely. This is a V-necked dress done in the same way as we were doing the V-neck earlier, so I just modified it into a V-neck line. Again, the facing is tacked down in the center front so it lays nicely. And again, we have some edge stitching just to make sure everything lays smoothly. And you can see this facing is just finished by serging the edge, which I do most of the time because I don't want to fuss with anything else. Here's what the back of that dress looks like. The facing is also tacked down at the shoulder and, of course, above the zipper. Here's the neckline I get asked about all the time that I was talking about earlier. Here's what it looks like finished. Again, I just have a facing with some edge stitching on the inside, and again, that facing is just tacked down as well. Here is that same neckline again on a different dress. This dress is lined as opposed to having a facing, but of course when you are doing something with the lining, usually the pattern pieces are the same for the fashion fabric and the lining, so if you make a change to one, it will automatically change the other. Just make sure you clip those curves, do edge stitching, and iron everything so that it will lay smoothly in the end. So that is how I change the neckline on my bodice and dress patterns and blouse patterns and most of my patterns really, unless something has a built-up collar or a specific kind of neckline that I'm going for where I need to make a lot more changes. This is basically the way I change my necklines on my dresses. And you'll notice if you analyze things I've made on my blog and look closely, you'll notice my dress pattern doesn't change that much. I use a very similar pattern for everything. I always start with my base block dress pattern and then make any changes like changing the neckline adding or taking away pockets, changing the skirt or sleeve shape. So it's basically just taking the same pattern and modifying it for different styles each time. But I don't really use vastly different patterns when I make things because I know my pattern fits me, and usually the styles I'm after are similar enough to the last thing I made that I don't have to make very many big changes in my patterns. And that's why I advocate for getting a base bodice and skirt pattern that you like and fits you into your repertoire, and then you can just make little changes like changing the neckline each time you want to make something new. And with a different neckline and different fabric, you'd be surprised how different the same dress pattern will look. So I think this is really good and simple change to have in your back pocket. And thank you guys for tuning in today while I tried to explain it to you. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have any specific sewing skills, tutorials, pattern drafting things that you would like me to touch on, please include that in the comments below and let me know what you would really like me to share with you, or anything. If I know how to do it, I will tell you how. And thank you guys as always for tuning in today. I will see you again soon. Bye.